So then we are back with the more understandings from the time of the second tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we then read sections of a layer related precisely with the time of the restoration period. Find it then in chapter 1:8 of Yeshayahu. And then during this period of time, where the great leader of Cuba unfortunately has died, Mr. Castro, and it's truly a very sad moment for the revolutionary spirit, because during this time of transition, what Daniel has given us is a few clues of a restoration of a system related with the 7th verse of the 11th chapter. Now, this truly is a bit involved, because the very culture of this particular language that the Holy Scripture is recorded, we find then a very profound analysis of what is abstract versus then what is solid action words. Truly, this period of time where then this great leader unfortunately has died, it then shows the great responsibility leaning towards the kingdom of the north. When we read the 7th verse of the 11th chapter, we find in a system that was obviously set aside, and then a system that came back. Now, when it relates with the tabernacling, the Hebrew word is not the same as then when you use a netzer word related with the layers of the Gentile level. These, for some people, might be a bit complicated because they don't spend time reading the original language. But from the flow of information coming through this particular prophecy, we find then a greater responsibility being placed upon the kingdom of the north. Because truly the link with Cuba and Congo was very strong. There were spiritual links with both places many decades ago, and truly shows an opening of the spiritual world related with this particular layer, showing then the kingdom of the north then taking on greater responsibility for the revolutionary spirit in the Americas. Now, revolutionary spirit is not finding plots against governments. It simply shows an opening of a couple of situations. Firstly, in Congo, where we find a lot of those people are Christians, and the kingdom of the north is obviously from this section of the religion. Cuba is then related with this section of religion, and then Cuba itself is related with this section of the religion. Latin America comes from the Latin language, and Latin language comes from a specific religion very much used in many countries. So the situation with the Soviet Union and the Congo is closer than ever, because the only true link of the revolutionary spirit of the Americas linked up with the socialism. It's a very important linking of these understandings, because those people who are not involved with the socialism, not in thinking or reading or studying, they don't understand, because they live in such an era where then politics and diplomacy from the past is not even as near as important as it was a few decades ago. But because of this lack of reading and studying and analysis, it truly doesn't take away the spiritual event or the events of the spiritual world related with this particular section of the scripture. Now, the kingdom of the north speaks then, 7th verses later, explained then, in later years comes then the kingdom of the north with a great army and much equipment. Now, in order for you to have a specific great army with much equipment related with the lining up of the events of the restoration period, not only of tabernacling, but also of trade, it requires a movement as far as lining up the armies. Now, we aren't talking about an isolated area of the kingdom of the north. Very importantly, we are speaking of principles of a spiritual leadership. We are not talking of, for instance, countries who have their own laws, isolated, playing a diplomatic game with other countries. No, we are talking of a holy scripture as it was during the time of the king of Babylon. So when there is a line of understanding in a certain area, it involves the forward motion of events. Not only the tiny world each country is involved with its own, and how it should be, or how they wish this world become of. So then there is a greater responsibility on the kingdom of the north than the Soviet Union of continuation of this revolutionary spirit. Now, it's not revolutionary because of the fight that went on during the time of Fulgencio Batista or during the time of the Cold War. It's related with the 7th verse of the 11th chapter, because those systems that were used during the Cold War are coming back. Now, the great understanding of these truly does not relate with the military power per se. It truly doesn't. The main objective of this period of time is lining up the trade. So China is behind these situations. However, the Soviet Union is then providing a means of a military protection of this new system. And Daniel is explaining the forward motion events taking place prior of the autumn feast. So then, because of these dynamics going on, there is a greater union of Congo and the Soviet Union. This truly is the only point linking the socialist forward motion of human what they say being equals. Because of the disparity of rich, fortunate people and unfortunate people, and most often during time of crisis, then this huge gap becomes even more evident, because the system is unstable. The system is no longer profitable as it was. Those people who have money, they don't spend as much. They are very watchful of their numbers. It's a normal consequence of times of crisis. Now, the government can do so much. Back many centuries ago and decades ago, you find if a person did not pay taxes, he was thrown in jail. It was a very serious problem. Today, we are electing presidents that they haven't paid taxes for a long time. And they find many kinds of excuses, and you're making an analysis of the whole situation, but you are making money, and you are excusing yourself from paying your share of what you are making, not because the laws are flawed. The situation of character. So, what was so dangerous back some decades ago, today we are electing people that don't pay taxes. So the situation changes. Now, the revolutionary spirit from Cuba remains strong, as then it maintains its line of socialism. They have their own identity, but they cannot be separated from the Soviet Union. Now, U.S. is obviously improving relationships with Cuba, but there is a situation going on in Mexico that becomes the icon of the trade of China, namely the Dragon Mart, the most powerful market in the world. The point is, during this time of the revolutionary spirit and the end of an era, it won't take very long for the Chinese realizing that the Americas must have a continuation of a link of the socialist line of thinking. So it wouldn't be very much surprising if China decides to remove Dragon Mart from Mexico. They are so confused with so many environmental laws, and then this particular building being in a position of transfer the building from Mexico to Cuba, and then continuing with the revolutionary spirit, but not because then Cuba wants to fight against the United States, fighting against other countries. It's because they want, obviously, improve their economy. However, then Cuba maintains its own identity. It's a very fine, interesting line, but indicates situations on behalf of China that Cuba must maintain its spiritual leadership. So lots of situation going on. The Mexican government has not made a decision. They had an embargo against Dragon Mart, and they are involved. The Chinese paid for the environmental costs. The Mexican government went behind on their word. It's very confusing. It now gives the Chinese absolutely the forward motion to truly make a deal with Cuba, and then making sure this building in Mexico is then placed in Cuba, and maintaining than the reference point of distribution of the Chinese products in the Americas. Of course, they must understand and refurbish their government related with taxation, because then the huge amount of money flowing to Cuba would be amazing. So it's a time of reforms, a time of renewal, a time of transition, yet the very strong revolutionary spirit, but not per se in a military line, then making a transfer. So then this spiritual understanding of the time of the Cold War is then somewhat lined up with trade, maintaining then the ideals of Fidel Castro, but not in a point that ends an era but completes an era, and then continuing the line of Fidel Castro via the Chinese Dragon Mart. This would be the perfect point of organizing this island and making sure then there is a central point of the Chinese distribution in the Americas. As President Obama very wisely decided to open the borders in a limited way at the moment, at least, but then the economy of Cuba would improve in such a way that the tourism would obviously increase, and then more travelers obviously joining the Cuban government, the Cuban way of life, culture, and would give these people on the islands over there, and they're truly going through a rough time ever since the 60s, and then improving the relations with the United States and Cuba. So then a link with the Soviet Union, China, and Cuba maintains its course. Now, Mexico is very interesting because they have a lot of industry, but unfortunately got entangled in their own paperwork. And though the Chinese, they paid their dues, then they went back on their word. So the whole situation is in the embargo. And for the Chinese, it doesn't cost them to get the equipment and get whatsoever they have there and going to Cuba. So then maintains the greatest revolutionary spirit of Fidel Castro, because he cannot go under any condition, because this revolutionary spirit is recorded on a Holy Scripture. Daniel the prophet was giving us understanding of a military condition lined up with an era, and then the refurbishment of this particular line, where you find them later on linked with the Soviet Union, and then 7 verses later you find in the Soviet Union coming with a greater army and much equipment. Now we understand that there was 1,000 years granted without the influence of tabernacling. 800 years, most of this time, was under Great Britain, the great influence of this particular time. And then a couple of 100 years obviously was related with the United States. So those people who are a bit studious, these layers are organized. In the Hebrew text, though there were many times of editing of a lot of these understandings, but you find when you are editing a section of the instructions or the prophets, it's not only a random situation, are you going to make it an improvement of a particular section of it. No, it has to line up with the prophets. So there is not only the language related with the content, there is the spiritual content. If there is a flaw in a content in a spiritual understanding, it won't make any sense. So these particular layers are related with this revolutionary spirit because of the nature of these 1,000 years and mostly couple of nations leading this time. But then you have to have an understanding of a military movement away from this particular period of time where then it was combined religion, trade, and military. Some people would understand it as defragmentation of this period that already has ended, known as the New World Order. So then, what Fidel Castro has done is truly recorded. The point is, the world was so obscured and so far away from tabernacling during these 1,000 years, and when these prophecies they begin to reawaken themselves, then we find those portions related with sections that involve trade, military, and also tabernacling. So then the revolutionary state remains. Now the point is merging what Fidel Castro went through and then ending with the trade. Then the situation lines up, and then a strong link from Congo and the Americas and the Soviet Union and Congo becomes intact. And then the Kingdom of the East, China, able of making decisions and projections with the help of the Americas. Because direct trade with China is becoming more and more evident. The last APEC meeting, visit or reunion, Peru and Chile, they are already very much in the hands of China. So the United States already lost a couple of countries in South America. So in order for us to maintain partnership with these South American countries, we must help Congo organizing its mines. Then our system that was severely weakened, and we find then the military section being strengthened by the Soviet Union, and then you find the trade later on at 21st chapter and then becoming weakened, and then this same layer related with the 21st you find then roughly in 28 and 29 being strengthened. So there is a transitional time from these particular layers, and it is truly related with the trade. So then, by logic and understanding, China should consider very strongly of having Dragon Mart in Cuba, because this would make a approximation of the Americas, since Brazil, for instance, has helped with a lot of money of organizing the port in Cuba. So Cuba is extremely strong in South America, Central America. Now, these countries are not going against the United States because the future of this country is already preset. There is a great section of weakening of our system, but then because of the help of Congo, providing help and organizing those mines and using the American money as a means of international exchange in Congo, in Africa, and then other countries around, strengthen then our system, while providing in South America ways of improving their own economy based from the Chinese market. Now, China is not going to take over the governments of South America. The whole situation of products and profit is related with taxes. Countries are complaining, because only China makes junk and this and that and the other. There are levels of purchase. You can buy products with a higher quality for a very short amount of money, or then not so expensive. You can upgrade certain products to a certain quality or higher quality for a very minimal amount of money. The problem is the government in South America, most of the money they steal. That's why they don't observe where the profits are going, and then they blame the Chinese. No, a lot of countries in South America, they began a very important portions in their governments because of the Chinese market. The problem is they have stolen the money. It's not that the market went bad. Because there are many sections of the rare materials industry, and then grain, farming, those are very important. Now the governments, they are stealing so much, and then there is no money left. So then the forward motion of the situation related with the prosperity of the people is related with the proper taxation. And then the country is becoming more honest. That's what the refurbishment of the sons of Ishmael is related with. That's why the Chinese and the Arabs in Dubai and Arabia, you have a dragon Mart there. Is that a coincidence that you have a Chinese that speaks a language that is absolutely 180 from the language of Arabia? And those countries are, they get along very nicely. So principles of the sons of Ishmael and the Chinese, they are already linked. So it's absolutely crucial and vital then for Cuba during this transitional time, speaking with the Chinese government and verify what it can come up with. Because from Cancun, Mexico, that is on the port side of the canal there, the ocean, the other side, you find then, it's not a very long distance from Cuba. Now, in a geographic understanding, you'll find then, if you verify the map in front of you, you find then Cancun is in the west, and then Cuba is in the east, but in Mexico itself is on the east side. And since they are so entangled with the politics and junk, It's a great chance for Cuba to organize its economy and maintain an icon, what so many years ago had taken place. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.